35% of those who develop cannabis-induced psychosis develop schizophrenia. That is like a huge statement.
Maybe there's something wrong here. So I called around his friends and I said, what would you say is wrong with Nick? And they said, he shouldn't smoke marijuana. When he smokes marijuana, he gets and says bizarre things. And we're all smoking the same marijuana he is, but he's reacting completely differently.
I think one of the reasons it's so important to focus on cannabis that you touched on is it is a modifiable risk factor. So many of the risk factors we know about for schizophrenia are not modifiable.
I think the key is not that cannabis isn't harmless, but I think to put a finer point on it, cannabis is a dangerous drug. That's the thing. It's a dangerous drug. And, I would have done things very differently with Nick if I had known.
This is Randy Kay. As you can hear from these excerpts, we explore a pretty hot topic, cannabis in its current state and its effect on psychosis. Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. This is episode 97, and this is a topic we have been wanting to cover for a long time. It's a hot topic. If you check our Facebook page, I put kind of a preview graphic on there and asked people to share their stories, and there are, at the moment, at least 40 comments. We are three moms. Each of our sons has schizophrenia. We've written 3 books about it, and we're nearing 100 episodes of this podcast. So welcome to Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. Our topic tonight is cannabis and mental illness. Is marijuana to blame for psychosis? I don't know if we'll have an answer, but we're going to explore that hot topic tonight. I'm Randy Kay. I'm here with my pals and fellow moms in the trenches, Mimi/Miriam Feldman and Mindy Greiling. Mindy, we missed you last week, and we're glad you're here. We understand why you couldn't be there. Just want to say we missed you at the Schizophrenia Symposium. And I do want to tell you that there was so much anecdotal concern about marijuana and pot. So that's one of the reasons that we're going to be talking about this tonight. We will be bringing on 2 guests who will talk about it as well. So Mindy, I understand you were at an S&P AA conference, Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance conference and position. So, tell us a bit about that.
Well, I think there were some commonalities with the 2 conferences, and I sure would have loved to have been at the one you guys were at, just so I could be with the both of you in person for the very first time in all of our lives.
Someday.
But that didn't work out. But the one I was at for Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance in Washington, D.C., was also a place where 3 moms, in this case only me, were rave reviews and lots of hugs from people who listen to this podcast. So I know you guys basked in that kind of acclaim as well. We had, this was the inaugural Spring Summit, and it wasn't open to everybody because it quickly filled up. We had a small venue, and we had needed to have people from a variety of strands. So we had caregivers like ourselves, people with lived experience, and also with mental illnesses. We also had researchers like Dr. Arun Nagendra, who will be with us shortly, from our staff at S&P AA. We had providers. Our own Dr. Robert Laitman was one of them who was there. And there were just a variety of people. And some of the conference had breakouts with each type of category just meeting amongst themselves, because the whole idea was to map out solutions, how to have better care and treatment for people with schizophrenia and support. And it was very much an action conference. We were not just learning, we were looking at what kind of research we have and then what can we do with it. And then the second day, which I unfortunately wasn't able to be at because I was heading into Italy and I already had my plane tickets coordinated.
Oh, poor you.
Yeah, poor me. But it was all about advocacy and helping the people who were there get organized and how to advocate and on local, state, and national policies. And we did invite the Treatment Advocacy Center. There were leaders there from the Shattering Silence group, and the whole idea was to work together and then figure out how we can all do the best we can with what we know to improve things for people with schizophrenia. So it was a very dynamic conference.
Awesome.
We also,
and I will just add that, Dr. Arun Nagendra will be one of our guests tonight, but also someone connected with the National Shattering Silence Coalition, Laura Balboni Craciun, will be joining us tonight as well. So this is all very sort of a beautiful web. Yeah.
Synergy of this event tonight is just amazing as well. And we have all these friends and people that we cross paths with. There were lots of people that were at the conference that I'd met, through this podcast and other places. But we also launched SPAN, which is the advocacy counterpart of the SNPAA. So that's Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Network. And so I'm a board member of SNPAA, but I'm also now the founding chair of that group. And we will be working with the staff, who hopefully will be the lion's share of the work, but we're the board that sets policies and directions and things like that. And on that board, one of the founding members is Bethany Yeiser, who's been a recent guest on our podcast. So it's a very small world that we live in, those of us who care, and getting bigger, though, about schizophrenia. So to lead into this topic tonight, I will say on the board, we all have committees that we're on and things that we chair, and I chair the policy committee. And Dr. Nagendra, who has been with SNPAA just for a little over a year, worked with our policy committee to come up with 7 initial positions that we wanted to have positions so that we could actually do advocacy. As you know, we had a program with SNPAA last fall when Gordon Levine, our executive director, was on with our lobbyist. And he told about the organization. We have 3 pillars: research, education, and advocacy. And advocacy is our newer effort. So in order to advocate, we wanted to have positions based on research. You can tell stories, and all of us tell our stories. And I always say stories like Laura is going to share with us tonight are the purest, finest form of advocacy. Policymakers are moved by emotion more than anything else. But it's much more powerful if the stories are backed up by research. So these policies that we developed with the policy committee are based on research. And so I'm going to name them, and then we can focus on the one that's on cannabis. So
just so you know, we're going to touch on these, then we're going to bring Laura in for the heart of the matter, because Laura has a lot to say as well, and her story was just featured in Newsweek and many other places. And then we'll circle back, because we want the stories and we want the science. So name the 7 positions, then we'll bring in Arun to talk about the cannabis one.
Yes, and as I said, nothing more powerful than stories, and even more powerful when they're backed up by research. So both of these 2 guests, I'm so excited. So I need to get through this so we can get to them. So the 7 that we've developed are on cannabis, compulsory treatment, which is AOT and things like that, decriminalizing mental illness. Randy knows that well with her son having been in jail for so long. Equitable care for diverse communities. All these are topics we have had guests on about. Coordinated care, having one system, not fragmented and siloed where people have to find what's there. HIPAA, and then recovery and cure. We talked about that last fall with Gordon, that while a cure might be far off, we want to have that goal insight. So everything we do is based on getting there. We have 4 more that we're going to develop before the end of the year. The needs of caregivers, discrimination and stigma that is involved in mental illness, the quality of medications, and then research needs. What do we need research so that we know more of? And one of them, I think, will be more research on cannabis. And Randy, maybe you could put it in the show notes. If anyone has topics besides any of those they would like to suggest, we're all ears, and we always want to know what more we can do and have research on and have positions. But I would like to turn it back to you, Randy, for introducing our guests. And I guess we're going to hear first, you said, from Laura, and then go to Dr. Nagendra. We call her Arun, to hear what research do we have so far, and what is that position that we worked on our policy committee that we're going to activate on, and actually already are. That can be the end of the show. What can everybody help us do?
Absolutely. So, Arun, why don't you turn your camera on so you're not in the black there? Just join us. Dr. Arun Nagendra is the Director of Research and Scientific Affairs at SNPAA, and she's spearheading the scientific strategic plan. And among those policies is position statement on cannabis use in schizophrenia, which I have in front of me, which includes things like cannabis use significantly increases the risk of developing a psychotic disorder such as schizophrenia. Is this still true? You told me you were, okay. Then they have a percentage of psychotic disorders that might be prevented if heavy cannabis use were stopped, and then a call to action. So that's what Arun will talk with us about. But I'd like to also introduce someone who was kind enough to leave a policy meeting early to come here and be on the podcast, the policy director for the National Shattering Science Coalition in Massachusetts. Is that right, Laura? So it's Laura Balboni Craciun, and her story, I found it was just featured on Newsweek and many other places. And Laura, come on in and welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and Arun as well.
Thank you, Randy. I find a lot of comfort from you three. It's National Shattering Silence Coalition. So the silence is about people who are too traumatized, or people who are too shy, or there's a stigma, that don't speak out and say the things that need to be said. And that's why I love this organization, because I have a lot to say. And I've learned things the hardest way possible about the mental health care system now that I need to shatter that silence.
Okay,
And
so
at the risk of my son's privacy, I'm telling you his story because I know many other families are going to relate. He is 22 years old, very sweet, kind, thoughtful, smart, but is schizoaffective, as his latest diagnosis from the Middlesex psychiatric unit in his prison. So to start back at the beginning, he was a sweet and thoughtful child. He was always the one who could figure out gifts for people when I couldn't, and loving and charismatic, a leader in all of his sports, very talented. At around age 15, he moved with his dad into the city. We had separate homes, and at that time got introduced to a new crowd, and unbeknownst to me had started smoking heavily marijuana with his friends. And unbeknownst to me, until his senior year, or maybe even after college, he had gotten into quite a bit of trouble and doing bizarre things that I didn't raise him to do. His brother, nobody else in our family would ever do. And so we were kind of wondering what's going on with him. Maybe it's a phase, boys go through that rebellion. You shouldn't worry about that. But when he started doing things in his senior year that really bothered us, we were struck with, okay, maybe there's something wrong here. So I called around his friends and I said, where, what would you say is wrong with Nick? And they said, he shouldn't smoke marijuana. When he smokes marijuana, he gets and says bizarre things. And we're all smoking the same marijuana he is, but he's reacting completely differently. So that was different. He had run away from home after an argument with his father about homework, and we were trying to find him for 3 days. And when we did find him, he had been hiding and eating 1 hamburger a day and not eating. So when we had a nice conversation alone, he admitted to me that he can't feel anything, that he has no reality. That's when I knew, okay, there's something wrong with him. And after that point, I tried so hard to get him the help he needed. He didn't think he was ill. Fast forward 2 years later, a year and a half later, he went missing again, this time for 3 months. And when he returned, sat down with family, told us where he was, and in a total nonchalant voice, monotone, said that he was listening to voices. So he went up to climb trees to get clearer reception, so to speak, and then took off his clothes to do that. And well, we knew something was very wrong at that point. And as the weeks and months rolled on, he had no marijuana in his system anymore, but yet he kept having these psychotic moments that lasted sometimes a few minutes, sometimes half a day, sometimes several days, sometimes a week, which was the first hospitalization that summer in late August. They gave him antipsychotics. He didn't take them. Another month later, he's back into McLean, and they were going to commit him for 6 months. They only kept him 2 months because he was non-compliant. When he got released from there, was told to follow up with a psychiatrist, and he did not because he didn't think he was ill. And we lost track of where he went. He was with friends that he wouldn't tell us their names. So we had to trust that he was okay. But meanwhile, court cases came out against him, and we would see him at court, and we wouldn't know which Nick he'd be. Sometimes he was depressed, sometimes he was animated. We didn't know. When he came to court closer to one of the end of his cases, there was a lot of stress, and I think it caused extreme psychosis. He had been living in a mosque for 2 months and praying and fasting, and 3 days prior to the major incident, he had stopped eating and started talking to himself, and everybody was saying he was talking to the devil. And then he got to a place of such an imbalance that the imam from the mosque called his father and said, "Come get him. He's not balanced. He needs to go home." Well, his father wasn't feeling safe enough to have him home, but he said, he's been doing so well the past 2 months, maybe he's okay. But as soon as he picked him up, knew there was something wrong. He was saying, "You're pointing fingers at me, Dad," and he wasn't. He had his hands on the steering wheel or in his pockets, or not.
Yeah, we've all experienced something similar. And I know there's so much you can say, but right now I understand he is in prison. Is that true? Can you kind of jump to that? And how much you feel marijuana had to do with this? Because the Newsweek story, that's like in the headline, like marijuana caused my son's psychosis. I know there's so much to say, believe me.
Well, the first episode that he had, the 1 week long of psychosis, the truth was revealed recently that he had smoked right before that week. He'd been smoking heavily that week. But so the psychiatrist who saw him in the ER sat us all down and said, he's continuing to have these psychosis, and you should never let him smoke marijuana because it is so dangerous for certain people. And he is one of them. We had never heard that before. It was our first time ever hearing So I was shocked. I had no warning that Nick was susceptible to marijuana until it was too late, because he said now if he smokes one more time, he's going to have treatment-resistant bipolar with psychosis. And so I didn't even know treatment-resistant was a word. And so we were kind of stuck at that point. It was too late at that point. If we had known at age 15 when he moved into the city, if you told us, you may develop this debilitating illness that has no treatment with your smoking.
Thank you. And we will get back to, I know, we all feel you, believe me. We've all had our experiences, and you're not leaving us, stay here. But like with this story where it is, I'm going to turn to Arun in a minute to kind of back this up with some of the science because we all have our stories and no one's listening. So that's why we all get out there and advocate, but let's see if we can appeal to those who go, hey, give us the proof. So one of the things that you mentioned that is so important that you are advocating for is for that, I'll just throw this out there and then bring it to Arun to see why, that parents of middle and high school students should be educated about these risks because you wish you had been. Also, that public service announcements and billboards and radio shows should spread the word about cannabis-induced psychosis. You would like warning labels. And you also advocate for assisted outpatient treatment, which is a little bit off topic, and we do have shows about it, but it's all part of the agenda with, SNPAA and with us and with you as well. So it's all in there. So I will say that there's a lot of back and forth on the Facebook group with a lot of parents saying, yes, without marijuana, the psychosis would never have happened. And people are going back and forth. And I used to think that my son turned to marijuana for treatment to comfort him as his brain started to go haywire. And I have changed my mind because of some of the science we're going to hear about. I think you're right. I think it does cause it. But there are people who disagree, but we're here to learn some facts. My feeling right now is that if you have DNA that predisposes you to schizophrenia, then that's kind of like a loaded gun. And marijuana is what can sometimes pull the trigger. That's kind of how I'm visualizing it, because if you don't pull the trigger, the gun doesn't go off. So, Arun, please come on in and talk a bit about, and Laura, thank you so much for sharing this story. If you've read Mindy's book, Mimi's book, my book, you know that marijuana has played a part in at least triggering, and so has stress, but, in triggering the psychosis. So welcome, Arun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And Laura, thank you for sharing. I'm going to speak from just the perspective of the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance's position on cannabis. I'm just going to refer to us as SNPAA moving forward. So we did a good amount of research on this, and we also spoke with experts. And we came to the conclusion that we oppose the legalization of recreational cannabis because of the really strong evidence linking cannabis use to schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. There are a lot of numbers, a lot of stats out there. I'm going to give you two that I think just kind of capture for me kind of the magnitude of this problem. About 35% of people who develop cannabis-induced psychosis, which is kind of a transient state, and it's widely accepted that cannabis can lead to it can provoke kind of transient or kind of long-term psychosis, but about 35% of those who develop cannabis-induced psychosis are estimated to go on to develop schizophrenia, so a long-term psychotic condition. To give you a contrast, only about 10% of those who experience alcohol-induced psychosis go on to develop a long-term psychotic condition. I used to work in a first episode psychosis treatment clinic, and I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And we would tell people who came into our clinic, your brain is allergic to cannabis. Like, of all of the substances, do not use this one again. And so that's not the science of it, but it's kind of it really is kind of, I think, considered best practice clinically to also try to get people not to use cannabis again. Unfortunately, many of those who have come to us are already in treatment. So that speaks to how cannabis also increases risk of relapse. The reason that we are just cautious about using kind of this broad statement as an organization of cannabis causes schizophrenia is mostly just kind of due to our state of research and like what it means for to say like something causes something else. So not everyone who uses cannabis develops psychosis, and schizophrenia is generally considered to be an illness that has many factors that each kind of increase the risk of schizophrenia rather than like saying like any one factor causes schizophrenia. Beyond this, the research is just not quite there yet. We need to like really conduct like long-term biological and neuroimaging studies to understand like the mechanisms through which cannabis might provoke psychosis or contribute to the development of schizophrenia. And until we do that, we just cannot state definitively that cannabis causes schizophrenia. But that does not mean by any stretch that we should downplay the risk. This is a huge risk factor for the development of schizophrenia. The numbers speak for themselves and show that we just need to take this association, quote unquote, causal or not, extremely serious. It's estimated that 8 to 30%, 32% of psychotic disorders might be prevented if heavy cannabis use were stopped.
Everybody parses out their words, and I know that our board didn't want to say cannabis causes schizophrenia, but I would like to speak to moms out there, families, teenagers, like I talked to my granddaughter. And so I said to my granddaughter, you have an uncle, Uncle Jim, who has schizophrenia. You had, my grandmother had schizophrenia. We have plenty of people with substance abuse issues in our family. So therefore, don't use cannabis. And I think it's good enough, for extrapolating for me, who worked in government, where we said things very plainly and succinctly and didn't have to parse our words so much. I think, as you said, Arun, numbers speak for themselves. 35% of those who develop cannabis-induced psychosis develop schizophrenia. That is like a huge statement. And then that cannabis, it significantly increases the risk of schizophrenia, that people are more apt to develop psychosis if you use cannabis. So to me, that's like alarm bells. Anyone who thinks that it's not involved, it doesn't, if we don't want to say it doesn't, that it does, if we don't want to say it causes schizophrenia, I think that all but does that. And I think that's the main audience we have here, is people who, if you still have a chance to affect anybody, to not have them use cannabis. It makes, even if you currently have schizophrenia, it makes it worse. Could you talk about that, Arun, about the effects of people like the one you cited that you saw in your clinic, that what happens to your schizophrenia if you continue to use cannabis?
So I think like one of the reasons it's so important to focus on cannabis that you touched on is like it is a modifiable risk factor. So many of the risk factors we know about for schizophrenia are not modifiable, like genetics. So the reason we focus on cannabis in clinical settings is both because it's a risk factor. You can see like if somebody starts using cannabis again, especially heavily, that it just does increase their risk of relapse. Each time somebody has a relapse, there's a potential for more kind of neurodegeneration. Like it can just set into effect this kind of like cascade that really can kind of send people down a trajectory during a really bad trajectory during a really sensitive time in their lives. And so, am I answering your question? It's just something where we are like, we know that it's not good for people who have psychosis, who have a predisposition to psychosis. There's research starting to come out showing that even if you don't have this genetic predisposition to psychosis, like cannabis can potentially increase the risk of experiencing psychotic symptoms. Like the research has not caught up, I think, to what we're often seeing anecdotally. And I'm really curious to see like what we're going to see maybe 10 years from now in terms of like the evidence for it. But
thank you.
Really,
yeah, I'm sorry, were you finished with that?
No,
Yeah, and in a minute, we'll get to some of the things in your position statement, but Mimi's been very quiet, and I want to get back to you in a minute. But Laura, you're listening intently. So is some of what Arun is saying, you just actually muted yourself, so unmute. Is anything of what Arun is saying, does that hold true with your Nick, with your story?
Well, they say you're supposed to have more caution if you hear of somebody saying like Nick used to come to me when he was upstairs saying there was something up there in the bathroom, and he looked spooked. He was a junior in high school, so this is a full grown almost man saying he's scared of the upstairs. And so I kind of thought, oh, he might be a psychic, or he might have some special ability. So it was kind of hidden. And if I had more warning as a parent from a show like this, I would have been told by the doctors that if you have any suspicion that they may tend toward the idea of seeing or hearing things that aren't there, and you're just on that verge of doubting whether it was their special sensitivity, they can feel ghosts in a room or something, or you just have that doubt, go on the side of caution and just say before 22, nothing. 25, nothing. 30 even. Just wait till you're 30 till you have those LSD, hallucinogens, any of those, because there are long-term studies in the UK and Canada, and they did do study. I think his name is Murray. Sir Murray is a psychiatrist in Europe who did a long-term study, and it did show that the cannabis was the culprit for psychosis. Yeah. So I want more research, certainly, but I think there is enough that you can definitively say you should have caution. I just didn't know.
Yeah, I think we're all. Mimi's got a question.
Yeah. Okay. So did you say, Arun, that the position is that marijuana should not be legal of the SPNA?
Recreational, I think she said.
Yeah, so SNPA opposes the legalization of recreational marijuana or recreational cannabis.
Okay, because it's like, and believe me, I'm on board with everybody here. Marijuana didn't do any good for my Nick either. And I think that we need the education and we need the information to know that what's at risk here, because I had no idea either. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. I thought that marijuana was not a big deal. And it's, first of all, the drug itself is very different now than it was 40, 50 years ago. But also we have all this science. But at the same time, we have this drug that has been legalized recreationally widely. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of the people who use it, it's not a problem. And so, we have the same thing with alcohol, where certain people are born with a predisposition for alcoholism. Alcohol is basically poison for them, but we don't, as a culture, as a society, outlaw it for the whole culture, even though we'd probably be better off without it. But again, it's like one of those things that is hard to get rid of once it's here. So I'm just wondering if maybe our energies and our money and our attention should be really focused on education and making people aware of this, as opposed to somehow trying to put the genie back in the bottle, because I don't think that's going to happen. And then also, I'm glad that you said the recreational thing, because I also have a lot of friends in the epilepsy world with kids who have epilepsy, and cannabis is very helpful in many respects with them. So it's a real tricky subject. What do you think about that, Bryn?
Oh, sorry, before I go on, before I forget, that's CBD, that's without THC for the epilepsy. I've read that as well. So cannabis. Is
that correct, Arun? Because I think that it is cannabis
without THC, CBD.
There's like the compound. There are compounds within cannabis, and THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is kind of like the one that's responsible for a lot of its psychological effects. CBD, has different effects. And so I don't actually know about this epilepsy research, but I do know there are multiple compounds within cannabis.
Before we get too hung up on the opposition to legalization, I'll just say that one, everything that's in our positions are, in addition to science, are also, political considerations with what the positions that were taken. And we were clarified that we were not opposed to, or that we didn't support criminalizing people that use marijuana, that there should be treatment, not punishment. So that we strongly supported. And also, we went on to say, even though we oppose that national sentiment favors legalization. And so we put all our eggs into the basket of what to do now that it's being legalized. But we just felt we needed to state, though, being with all the people that we know and all in our families that are suffering with schizophrenia, that many of us do believe, like Randy said, caused our child's schizophrenia, then we would like to save other people that headache, but it's not where we're putting our energy. And NAMI's
I do think that it's important that an organization like that does take the stand of being equivocably or unequivocally against it. I was just wondering, in terms of the greater culture, how we could ever implement that.
Right.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Arun.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Mindy said, that we did feel like we needed to take this stance because we partly because it's the effects of cannabis on psychosis, even though there is this research, Laura mentioned some by Robin Murray in the UK, like it's there and it is damning. And it's not being kind of considered by legislators. And so that's why we kind of had that statement. We immediately follow it in our call to action by saying that, we don't think it should be criminalized. We understand that legislative sentiment favors legalization, and that given that that's the case, we have to take all of these steps, some of which Laura mentioned. Yeah.
So the National Shattering Sales Coalition also is not against criminalizing cannabis. It's good for a lot of reasons, especially the CBD portion of the cannabis, not the THC, but there's no policy that we have against it either. It's just anyone under 25, or even they told us in the ER 30, anyone under that age is still developing their brain, and it's actually getting even closer to the end stages of development towards the end, and so you're really susceptible then. And so why would you risk damaging your brain at that age? I don't even know why it's legal under the age of 30, honestly.
Exactly. So maybe I would like to know then, another reason we have Arun on here is to talk about the Drug Enforcement Administration opportunities to submit comment on whether or not, or what should be done now that legalization is, or not legalization, but the scheduling is changing. Could you talk about that, Arun? And I would also like to know one of the reasons that some people support that. In fact, I talked to Dr. Ken Duckworth, who's going to be a guest on this podcast next month. And I was talking to him about that, but we got to talking about this topic. And he said he supports going from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, so more research can be done. But I
don't understand Schedule 1, Schedule 3. Can you dumb it down for me, please?
Yeah, let's have Arun dumb it. She's probably can say it more clearly than I can.
Because I don't understand what you just said.
I'm going to save my question that I had with Dr. Duckworth after she explains that. Talk about the DEA proposal.
Absolutely. And yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm dumbing it down. I'll just try to explain it.
Let's say, well, I'm okay. Explain it to me like I'm a fourth grader, please. I respond well to that.
The DEA is essentially proposing to reclassify cannabis from what it is right now, a Schedule 1 substance, to a Schedule 3 substance under what's called the Controlled Substances Act. So Schedule 1 drugs are the ones that are seen as the most highly addictive, have huge potential for abuse, don't have a medical use, and so they're very restricted. Schedule 3 drugs, by contrast, are considered to have some potential for abuse, but are kind of recognized for having some medical benefits, They can be prescribed by doctors, and it does open the door to research. And so, just kind of put simply, cannabis is now going to be considered less dangerous, recognized for its medical uses, and it's in the same category now as medications like Tylenol with codeine or certain prescription weight loss drugs, not Tylenol period, but Tylenol with codeine. It still has to be prescribed. And so this has several implications, including that it paves the way for cannabis to be more accessible for medical care and research. It also increases accessibility to cannabis. It's a separate process than kind of like the legalization process. But we are concerned about the reclassification because we do not think that, again, it's really taking into account the evidence about the link between cannabis and psychosis. Doctors don't necessarily know about that link. And so like the people who are maybe doing this prescribing may not actually be attending to like these factors that they really should know about. It may just pave the way for greater access to people who are vulnerable to psychosis, including teenagers, pregnant women, et cetera. So our concern is really that it just hasn't been fully thought through in the context of psychosis and schizophrenia.
Thank you. So, in the interest of time, we're okay, but we're almost at an hour, believe it or not. So, Mindy had a question, which I want to, and then I want to bring this to what can we do? So, we have two guests. We have five of us here that can talk about policy change, but I also want to talk about some of the things that Laura brought up that I read about, what else just in the real world before laws can get changed, what are some other things that we can ask for as advocates? Because I believe both Laura and I currently have sons in the criminal justice system. Do I have that right, Laura?
Right.
And I attributed completely to marijuana. My son wasn't arrested for marijuana possession, but it's the world he was traveling in and the condition he was in mentally that made him very arrestable. I'll put it right there. So there, there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm, got my fingers crossed, and I'm going to Al-Anon that a lesson has been learned, but I don't know. There's only so much I can do, but I want to talk about what we can do. So Mindy, your question, then policy, then other things that we can all do.
And so the fact that the two of you have sons in prison, I just want to make a
Mine's
comment.
in jail.
Or
Well,
jail,
he's
I
actually
mean,
in jail
jail.
diversion right now, but they're
I
both in the
know,
criminal
I know.
justice system. Yeah.
You keep saying incarcerated, and I think of that as prison, but it could be jail too. So jail and prison, yes. I always think when I work on advocacy, invariably what I accomplish is too late for my son. So I think what the kinds of things we are going to be talking about here are often the kinds of things we wish we would know, and then this is what we're recommending for people that are starting out. But we can help with that and help other people not end up like we have. My son has been in jail too due to his drug use, including being charged with a gross misdemeanor that we still have on his record. But so I would like to have us know, and the viewership here, and including all of us, what we can do to give input to the DEA. I think I'm going to skip my other question until Dr. Duckworth gets here. But what can all of us do? What can Randy put in the show notes, Arun, to give input to the DEA about this change from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3? And especially if you could talk about labeling, which is kind of a fallback position, assuming they're going to do it no matter what they hear from anybody.
Absolutely. So just to speak to the labeling part. So no labeling has currently been proposed as part of like what the DEA is saying regarding from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 regarding kind of posting warnings about the effects of cannabis on psychosis. And it is our position that like this needs to be all over marketing materials, all over every single item of cannabis sold, that like in the way that is done with like alcohol and tobacco in terms of like the risks. And so that is not there at all. And so there are a few kind of different things people can do. You can submit formal comments through the DEA like website and process. it is best, this from my understanding is a pretty like involved and complicated process. You can reach out to us if you are interested in doing that. It is best done, I think, if you have like an affiliate organization that you can kind of say like this organization is kind of putting forth these comments. The other big thing you can do is we just need to build awareness around both this DEA proposal, but also around like cannabis and psychosis in general. I am so surprised by how many people I talk to who do not know about this link at all, and they are so surprised to learn about it. So talk to others, blog about it, post on social media, put it on your podcast. Just make sure that people understand the risks and the potential action steps that we want taken. These are outlined in our position statement, but I think I think the biggest thing we can do is build awareness, really widespread societal awareness.
Okay, so individuals it's not a process for individuals to give input to the DEA, it's more organizations. But Randy already is then going to put our position with the call to action and action steps in the show notes. And you said build awareness, if you could pick just, the top thing in our call to action that people could do, which one would that be?
That's a great question. I would say that it's a labeling issue. I think it just needs to be on I think it just needs to be everywhere, that it has this like massive increase in risk. I think the science is there, and I think we're in a place to kind of like talk about that and make it very public.
Why do you think they're not putting it on there? I mean, the cigarettes and tobacco there was a great long period when everybody got cancer before we got that labeling on there. Do we have to have a lot more people with schizophrenia before they put it on there, or could we skip that part and get them to put it on there?
Great question, Mindy. I'm not entirely sure. I spoke with a few people, and part of what it might be is that like medical community and advocates have not like fully like elevated this issue, which is why we're really encouraging people to do so. Like we need to make it like a thing that's just very much in the faces of policymakers, that they cannot avoid the extent of this risk factor.
Okay.
They aren't doing any of this in Minnesota. We just legalized it in the last session, and as far as I know, this isn't being done, and there's even a lag in how much money is there for treatment, but especially the fact that there is going to be a need for mental health treatment is not being thought of. It's more thought of substance abuse treatment, but the idea that people might be getting more schizophrenia and the state has to pay for that, it doesn't seem to be in the thinking.
Yeah, so I'm going to, there's a lot of reasons things don't get done quickly in this country, and I don't think we want to go there right now. In case somebody is not in a place to look at the show notes, and Laura, you're next. The website it's sczaction.org. Can they find the call to action on the website? Yes. So just so you know, Laura, these are the 6 things in their cannabis call to action. 1, oppose legalization of recreational cannabis use. And there's more to it. I'm just reading the headline. 2, pair any legalization effort with stringent, practical harm reduction practices. So increasing awareness. 3, hold the cannabis industry financially accountable. I'm not going to say more about that, but just so you know what they are. 4, and I think this is right in line with what you're going to talk about, Laura, implement public health initiatives that educate about the risks of cannabis use. 5, conduct research into the effects of cannabis use. And 6, to finance clinical assessment and intervention. So, Laura, your story is out there to help others not go through what many of us have gone through. What are your thoughts about what people can do?
Well, the one thing that I wanted to follow up is the medical marijuana piece. They are using that term very loosely, and until they have an FDA approved drug that is without any with it, that it is actually, that is a medical marijuana. When you talk about using marijuana in a recreational way and then calling it medical, I don't think they have quite a handle on that yet. So I've been learning a lot recently with johnny'sambassadors.org. That is a group very focused on educating, and they do have public service announcements. And under their education tab, you can print out flyers for your schools. There's like 110 educators that go actually to the schools. They are doing a lot right now. Especially, they have a conference next week in Colorado, which was the first state to legalize marijuana, so it's a hot zone. And I think they are doing a lot for education and awareness. They're not doing any policy. The policy people for marijuana are the learnaboutsam.org. It's SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. They are advocating very heavily in the White House, and also the drugpolicy.org podcast, which talks about why we are so misinformed. And we have so much more to go before the country kind of becomes overwhelmed with, if it becomes Schedule 3, there's going to be a rush of marketing from the big marijuana companies because they won't have any tax write-offs. So their money can now be spent on spreading, but without any warnings, that's a disaster waiting to happen. So I wish I had all this information, and I beg not just the mothers, but the kids out there who are looking at their friends acting strangely to speak out. I think Nick's friends all regret not saying something sooner to us right now. And that's something they have to live with. In fact, one of them checked himself into a hospital when it got really bad. So everyone needs to know. And you won't see that, those labels won't matter for people like my son, because he didn't ever get his marijuana, which he smoked 5 to 6 times a day, from any dispensary. He got that from people who are selling it. So it needs to be on the public service announcements. It needs to be commercials. It needs to be on the talk shows. I don't know why it isn't. And frankly, I'm kind of mad that people have been too quiet about it, because now look where we are. Look where we all are. So,
Thank you. This is, and all of those links, including the link to Laura's story in Newsweek as well. I also see something, Daryl Herman's peer talk on psychosis recovery. There's a link for that on, and votervoice.net to oppose marijuana rescheduling to the DEA. So we have that in the show notes, or you can rewind and hear it again. I have a link to Laura's story, and also the schizophrenia.com has prevention / street drugs. So there is information out there, and I think that people can go back and forth with, is it the chicken or is it the egg? But I think most of us can agree that our sons, wherever the schizophrenia came from first, would probably have been and would be now better off without the use of marijuana. So we want to do everything we can and to keep them as healthy as we can and out of the criminal justice system. And all we can do is the best we can do. Mimi, do you have anything to add about this?
No, I really don't. I just think the education component of this is so vital, because I agree with Laura. People just don't know, and we need to be talking about this.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I also grew up in the 60s, and it was a different, I wasn't a person who partook in it very much. And when I did finally try it, when I was in the music world, I was kind of like, ooh, I don't really like this. So I just don't have that gene of getting addicted to it or even enjoying it, to tell you the truth. But every time there's on a talk show, whenever, even on Colbert, one of my favorites, whenever he says, oh, legalizing marijuana, the whole crowd like bursts into applause, like it's the best thing. But it's kind of that mentality of, hey, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Like we want to joke about it, but to some people, it's not a joke.
Well, and I think the big problem is, again, the not knowing. Because okay, sounds like I was a little different in the 60s than you were. But
I was singing folk songs. What can I tell
like
you?
I was too, but I was smoking pot while I was doing it. But the thing
I
is
was
that-
right there with Randy. I just tried it once and didn't like
well,
it.
but let me say, I think that one of the ways that we've gotten into this terrible mess is that there is a general consensus among the older people, us, who were raising these younger people, that it's not that big a deal. And that's where I think it's so important that not only do we understand this link, which is more and more and more being proven. You know, when Nick first got sick 20 years ago, they're like, well, maybe, maybe not. Well, we have the scientific proof now, but also that the marijuana is different. It's not what is in our memory bank of what it was like 40 years ago. And so it's a much more serious drug, even if it doesn't cause psychosis in a particular person. It's just we need to understand this drug and be made aware of the pitfalls.
And there are facts in the S&PAA position that Randy's going to post about the actual numbers for how much the THC has increased since the 60s.
All right, so there's only, I have a limited number of space in the show notes, to tell you the truth. So I'm probably going to be, honestly, it would be like,
well, that's all the very same piece, that one you're just reading from.
Right. So we'll probably put a link to the sczAction.org website, and you can, I'll put the highlights, I'll put the headline of each one on there, but I can't put all the, but for additional information, is that findable on your website?
Yes, very easily. They could go to S&P, the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance, but it's even quicker to find it on SPAN, the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Network, because they're right on the very beginning. The positions are there. And
is that a
website?
SPAN, is span.org or?
Arun, I should know that, but do you know what the website is for the SPAN?
It's not the easiest to remember.
While you're looking,
I know it. It should be.
While we're looking, Laura, final word.
The Johnny's ambassadors that are having the conference next week is significant because on 7/10, it is dab day in weed world, because dabbing actually is the equivalent of 50 joints. And this is what the kids are celebrating on 7/10. So Johnny's Ambassadors has an anti-dab day. And the reason they call it 7/10 is the dab day is because when you turn upside down the 7/10, it looks like the word oil. Just like 4/20 is weed day. So Johnny's Ambassadors taught me this, and they are actually scheduling their whole conference around this 1 week because of that reason. So Johnny's Ambassador, that's a Facebook page as well for parents. That's another great resource for everyone.
Wow. And dabbing is something even in the 60s, I never heard of, but I've heard of it now. We just got the website for SPAN, which is, thank you, Arun, SPAN-SCZ.org. So you can find all that information here. I think we can all agree, and certainly we're preaching to each other and we're all on the same page. But if you're listening and you have doubt, in the 60s, they used to be afraid that marijuana was a gateway to other drugs. And I think we're here to say it can be a gateway to psychosis and to trigger serious mental illness, which can be way worse. So, we're not asking anybody to change their mind, but maybe to open their mind to new facts. I used to think that it had nothing to do with my son's illness, and I have opened my mind, and now I feel differently. So, maybe it is the trigger that makes the loaded gun be dangerous. Either way, we applaud all of the work that you're doing to make this more out there and more provable by science. We have a lot of work to do, and you guys are doing the work. And thank you so, so much for joining us tonight for this difficult topic. Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches with Randy Kay, Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randyk.com.